The wreckage, the darkness of space, stretched endless and cold around the salvaged ship as Commander Elias Vance guided his vessel through the debris field that had once been something magnificent, had spent 12 years hauling broken ships and forgotten cargo through the outer reaches, where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. And all that time, he had learned one simple truth about the universe: big things died just like small things, and when they died, they left pieces behind, and those pieces were worth money to the right people. But this wreckage was different, and he knew it the moment. His scanners picked up the Imperial sigil burned into the hull fragments floating past his viewport, a Karth class cruiser bearing the mark of the Valkyrie Dominion royal fleet and royal ships. Did not simply die out here in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, where only smugglers and salvagers dared to travel. Elias rubbed his jaw and considered turning around. Because Imperial entanglements meant Imperial attention, and Imperial attention meant the kind of trouble that made men disappear without anyone bothering to ask where they went. But then his scanner pinged with something that made his blood run. Cold life signs. One single life sign weak and fading somewhere in the twisted metal corpse of the royal vessel. He cursed under his breath because he knew what the smart choice was, and he knew he was not going to make it. The airlock sealed behind him with a hiss as he pushed through the wreckage with his magnetic boots, keeping him anchored to whatever surface he could find. Emergency lighting flickered red and orange through corridors that had been torn open by whatever catastrophe had befallen this ship, and Elias moved carefully because debris could kill a man just as easily as any weapon. The life sign led him to a collapsed cargo bay, where storage containers had been thrown around like toys by some giant child having a tantrum. And there among the destruction he found Hirsch. She was small and curled into a ball beneath a fallen support beam that had created a tiny pocket of safety in all the chaos. Her skin was silver white and seemed to shimmer even in the dim emergency lighting. And when she looked up at him, he saw 4 eyes blinking in a pattern that did not match and could not synchronize because of the terror that filled Thema, Valkyrie child, the ruling species of the Dominion that controlled half the known galaxy. The same species whose emperor had just issued a bounty of 3 million credits for what the official broadcasts called genetic deviance of the 16th Clutch. Elias had heard the stories because everyone had heard them even out here in the reaches. Where news traveled slow and unreliable, the emperor had too many children from too many clutches, and some of those children had been born during a succession challenge that failed. And now those children were marked for death because dead heirs could never grow up to become rivals. Politics written in the blood of innocence. The girl could not have been more than 6 years old by human standards, though he knew Valkyrie aged differently, and none of that mattered because she was a child. Just a child. Her biotag confirmed what he already suspected as his scanner read the information encoded in the small device implanted at the base of her skull. 16th Clutch designation confirmed. Imperial. Termination order active. Bounty status 3 million credits alive, or 1 million credits confirmed deceased. 3 million credits would solve every problem Elias had ever had and create a comfortable life he could never have imagined during all his years of scraping by in the void between stars. The girl looked at him with those 4 terrified eyes, and she spoke in broken common that she must have learned from servants or tutors in whatever palace she had been running from. Please, she said, and her voice was layered with harmonics that made it sound like music even when filled with fear. I will be quiet. She swallowed hard, and Elias could see her trying to make herself smaller, as if she could disappear into the metal floor beneath. I promise I will be quiet, she whispered. You will not even know I am here if you just let me hide. Elias stood there in the red emergency light surrounded by the corpse of a royal ship with 3 million credits worth of bounty, looking up at him with 4 eyes that had seen too much. Or for anyone so young, he thought about his ship and its failing engine that needed repairs he could not afford. He thought about the debts he owed to people who did not accept excuses or payment plans. He thought about how easy it would be to simply call the nearest Dominion outpost and let them handle this situation while he collected enough money to never worry about anything. Again then, he thought about his mother who had died when he was 7, and how she had told him that the measure of a person was not what they did when it was easy, but what they did when it was hard. He thought about his father who had raised him alone in the mining colonies and taught him that some things mattered more than money and more than safety and more than survival itself. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be when he finally closed his eyes for the last time and faced whatever judgment awaited him in the darkness beyond. The girl was crying now, with tears that looked like liquid silver running down her pale cheeks, and she kept whispering her promise over and over. "I will be quiet. I will be quiet. I promise I will be so quiet." Alias knelt down slowly so he would not frighten her any more than she was already frightened, and he extended his hand toward her with his palm open and facing up in the universal gesture of peace. "Yeah, kid," he said, and his voice was rough from years of breathing recycled air, but somehow gentle in a way he had forgotten he could be. "I know. You will." She stared at his hand like it was some kind of trap, because of course she did, because everyone she had ever trusted had either tried to kill her or failed to protect her, but something in his eyes must have told her what she needed to know, because after a long moment she reached out and placed her small silver hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch, and her fingers trembled against his palm, and Elias made a decision in that moment that would change everything about his life and probably get him killed. But some things mattered more than survival. He helped her to her feet and led her back through the wreckage toward his ship, and as they walked, he started thinking about how exactly he was going to hide a Valkyrie princess from an empire that wanted her dead. It was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done, but when she looked up at him with those 4 frightened eyes and squeezed his hand like he was the only solid thing in a universe that wanted to destroy her, he knew it was also going to be the most important thing he had ever done. The disguise 3 months had passed as Elias pulled the girl from the wreckage, and in that time, the salvage ship called Aaron Hope had become something else entirely. The registration codes were new and falsified by a man on Data Station who owed Elias a favor from years back when Elias had conveniently forgotten to report certain cargo discrepancies to the authorities. The cargo manifests were creative works of fiction that would have impressed any novelist, and the flight paths now wound through territories where Dominion patrols rarely bothered to venture. Elias had become a smuggler, which was ironic because he had spent most of his career avoiding that particular career path, but smugglers survived by being invisible, and invisible was exactly what he needed to bait. Girl had a name now. Kirat was a human name, simple and common and utterly forgettable, which was exactly the point, because nobody would think twice about a human child named Kira traveling with her uncle through the outer territories. The lie was elegant in its simplicity. His niece, he told anyone who asked, and his expression always carried that particular weight of family tragedy that discouraged further questions. Bad situation back home, he would add with a shake of his head, and people would nod sympathetically and change the subject, because humans were known for their chaotic families and their messy lives. Nobody looked too closely at human problems, because human problems were boring and complicated and frankly exhausting to untangle. The lie only worked because of the disguise, and the disguise had taken Elias 3 weeks of sleepless nights to perfect thermal holographic mesh was the foundation, and it was technology designed for burn victims and accident survivors who needed to present normal faces to a world that often judged too quickly. Elias had modified it extensively until it could project a complete human face over Kira's alien features, transforming her silver skin into something that looked like pale human flesh and reducing her 4 eyes to 2 through careful Optical trickery voice modulation software handled the rest, smoothing the musical harmonics of her Valkyrie speech into something that sounded like a shy human child who simply did not like talking much. She wore gloves always because her hands still had that silver sheen that no hologram could completely hide. And she kept her secondary eyes closed at all times, which gave her the appearance of a girl who was perpetually tired, or perhaps a little sad. People found it endearing. They had no idea. They were looking at one of the most wanted beings in the entire galaxy, but the technology could only hide what was on the outside, and the inside was a different matter entirely. Kira struggled with everything, and Elias watched her struggle with a helplessness that made him want to break things. She flinched at loud noises because loud noises meant danger, and danger meant death, and her young mind had learned that lesson too well. During her escape from the palace, she refused to eat in front of others because meals had been where assassins struck, and poison was a traditional Valkyrie method of removing inconvenient airs. She spent hours in her small quarters practicing things that broke his heart: to witness how to blink with only two eyes, how to walk without the natural grace that marked her species as different, how to laugh like a human child instead of producing the crystalline sounds that came naturally to her throat. She was learning to erase herself piece by piece, and Elias did not know how to tell her that she should not have to do this, that no child should ever have to pretend so hard just to stay alive. One night she came to him in the cockpit, where he sat watching the stars drift past, and she climbed into the co-pilot seat that he had adjusted specifically for her smaller frame. Ilias, she said, using his name in that careful way she had, as if names were precious things that could be taken away at any moment. I have a question. He turned off the autopilot diagnostic he had been pretending to study and gave her his full attention because she rarely asked questions. And when she did, they were always important. Go ahead, kid. Why do they want me dead? The question hung in the recycled air of the cockpit, and Elias felt something twist in his chest because he had been dreading this conversation since the day he found her. He could lie. He could tell her it was a mistake or a misunderstanding, or that the bad people had simply made an error and everything would be fine once the error was corrected. But Kira was not stupid, and she had already seen too much truth to believe comfortable lies because of politics. He said, slowly choosing each word with care, "Your father has many children, and some of those children were born when other people were trying to take his power away. The succession challenge," Kira said quietly. "I know about that. Then you know that your father won and the people who challenged him lost. They were executed," Kira said, and her voice was flat in a way that made Elias realize she had probably witnessed some of those executions. "I saw some of them die." Elias closed his eyes for a moment and reminded himself that she was not a human child, and that Valkyrie culture was different, and that children in royal households saw things that no human child would ever be exposed to. It did not help. Your father decided that children born during that time were dangerous, Elias continued. "Not because of anything you did, but because of what you might become someday." "A rival," Kira said. "Yeah, but I do not want to be a rival," she said, and now her voice cracked with emotion that the voice modulator could not hide. "I never wanted anything except to be left alone and to learn about stars and to maybe have a garden someday." "I know, kid." "Then why?" she asked, and all four of her eyes were open now, shimmering with tears. That the holographic disguise transformed into something that looked almost human. "Why does he want to kill me for something I do not even want?" Elias reached out and took her hand gently, and he felt her cool fingers wrap around his own. "Because you could be something they cannot control," he said honestly. "And some people find that terrifying. That is not fair." "No," Elias agreed. "It is not fair at all." She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars that she had once told him she dreamed about when she was locked in her quarters in the palace. "Will you always protect me?" she asked finally. Elias looked at this small alien girl who had been running since before she understood why and who had learned to make herself invisible just to survive another day. "Yeah, kid," he said, "I will always protect you, even though I am not human. Especially because you are not human," he said, "because that means you chose to trust me anyway, and that means something." She smiled then, and even through the holographic mask, he could see the real Kira underneath. The girl who dreamed of gardens and stars and being left alone. The girl who just wanted to be safe. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not turning me in. Never going to happen." Elias said firmly, "You are my niece now, remember?" "I remember," she said, and she squeezed his hand like she had that first day in the wreckage. "I will be quiet." "I know you will," he said, "but someday, kid, you will not have to be." She looked at him with hope in her strange, beautiful eyes, and Elias made a silent promise to himself that he would do whatever it took to make that someday arrive. The Hunter-Inquisitor Vorath Cell had served the Dominion for 200 years, and in all that time he had never once failed to complete a task assigned to him by the throne. He was patient in the way that only Valkyrie could be patient with a mind that could hold a grudge across decades, and a will that did not understand the concept of giving up when the Emperor had summoned him to the palace and tasked him with recovering or eliminating the remaining 17 deviants of the 16th. Clutch Vorath had accepted the mission with the cold efficiency that had made him legendary among his peers. 15 of the deviants had been accounted for within the first month. Some had been found hiding in the estates of sympathetic nobles who had foolishly believed that their status would protect them from imperial justice. Those nobles had learned otherwise. Others had been captured by bounty hunters, eager for the substantial rewards, and had been delivered to Vorath in chains for processing. 16th Deviant had died when her escape vessel was intercepted by a patrol and destroyed with all hands that left the 17th, the youngest of the clutch and somehow the most difficult to locate her. Escape had been clever and her trail had gone cold almost immediately, which suggested that someone with intelligence and resources was helping. Vorath had spent months following whispers and rumors through the information networks that connected the galaxy, and slowly a picture had begun to emerge. A human salvager operating in the outer reaches had been seen in the vicinity of the royal cruiser that had been carrying several deviants to a secure facility for termination. That cruiser had been destroyed by what official reports called an engine malfunction, but what Vorath suspected was sabotage from within. The salvager had filed no report about finding survivors and had changed his ship registration and flight patterns shortly after the incident. These were not the actions of an innocent man. Vorath tracked the human for 3 more months, learning his habits and his contacts and his weaknesses. Human was named Elias Vance, and he had once been a respected salvage operator with a clean record and a reputation for honest dealing. Now he was something else entirely, a smuggler running supplies to fringe colonies through routes that avoided Dominion checkpoints, a man who had suddenly acquired a niece that nobody in his family tree seemed to remember existing, a fool who thought he could hide a Valkyrie princess from an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. Vorath finally cornered him on Way Station Omega 7, a neutral trading post where humans and other species mingled freely under the protection of an independent charter. The meeting took place in a private room that Vorath had rented specifically for this purpose, and he had made certain that the station authorities would look the other way, regardless of what transpired when Elias Vance entered the room with the cautious movements of a man who expected trouble, and the steady hands of a man who had faced trouble before and survived. Was taller than Vorath had expected, with gray hair and weathered features that spoke of a hard life spent in the void between stars. Commander Vance, Vorath said formally, "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "Did not have much choice," Elias replied as he took the seat across from Vorath. "Your messenger made it clear that refusing was not really an option." I prefer to think of it as strong encouragement. Sure, Elias said, and there was something in his eyes that Vorath found difficult to read. What do you want? Vorath studied the human for a long moment and decided that directness would serve better than subtlety. You recovered something from the wreckage of the Imperial cruiser. Ascending Dawn 3 months ago, he said, something that belongs to the Dominion. I recovered a lot of things from a lot of wrecks, Elias said evenly. Salvage is my business. Your former business, Vorath corrected. Now your business appears to be smuggling and harboring fugitives. I do not know what you are talking about. Vorath allowed himself a thin smile because he had interrogated thousands of beings across 2 centuries, and he knew the difference between genuine ignorance and careful denial. This was careful denial. Commander Vance, he said, leaning forward slightly, I am not here to threaten you or to make your life difficult, although I am certainly capable of both. That is reassuring. I am here to offer you a transaction, Vorath continued. 1 million credits transferred to any account you specify and complete immunity from any investigation into your recent cargo activities. He watched the human's face carefully, looking for the flicker of greed that such offers typically produced. He saw nothing. All I require in return, Vorath said, is information about what you recovered from the Ascending Dawn and where that item might currently be located. Elias was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was flat and unreadable. I already told you, he said. I do not know what you are talking about. 3 million credits then, Vorath said, increasing his offer significantly. And passage to any system outside Dominion space where you could live comfortably for the rest of your natural lifespan. Still do not know what you are talking about. Vorath felt something that might have been frustration stirring in his chest. Because humans were supposed to be mercenary and practical and easily motivated by financial incentives, everyone in the galaxy knew this. Commander Vance, he said, and now his voice carried an edge that had made hardened criminals weep with terror. I can make your life extraordinarily difficult. The human smiled then, and it was a strange, unsettling expression that showed too many teeth and carried no warmth whatsoever. Inquisitor, Elias said calmly, I have been broke and divorced and shot. Twice in places that hurt more than you can imagine. He leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had nothing left to lose. I once ate nothing but protein paste for 6 months because I could not afford actual food, he continued. I have been threatened by people far scarier than you, and I have survived things that should have killed me a dozen times over. He met Vorath's gaze directly, and the Inquisitor saw something in those human eyes that he had not expected. Defiance pure. Stubborn defiance that had no logical basis and no tactical justification. So if you want to make my life difficult, Elias said, you are going to have to get in line behind everyone else who has tried and failed. Vorath sat back and considered his options carefully, because violence was certainly available, but violence on a neutral station would create complications that even his authority could not easily resolve. This is not over, he said finally. I am sure it is not, Elias agreed. But for today it is, and I have a ship to get back to. He stood up and walked to the door without looking back, and Vorath let him go because there would be other opportunities, and the Inquisitor was nothing if not patient. But as he watched the human leave, he felt something that troubled him deeply: uncertainty, because Vorath had hunted many beings across many years, and he had learned to recognize the ones who could be broken and the ones who could be bought. Elias Vance appeared to be neither, and that made him dangerous in ways that Vorath had not anticipated. The hunt would continue because it always continued until the prey was caught, but for the first time in a very long time, the Inquisitor wondered if this particular hunt might cost him more than he was prepared to pay. The community word spread through channels that had no official names and left no records that any authority could trace the spacers and smugglers and frontier folk who made their lives in the forgotten corners of the galaxy had their own networks. of communication built on trust and mutual need, and the shared understanding that sometimes information was worth more than money. And the information spreading through those networks was simple but significant. A man named Elias Vance was protecting something importance, something that the Dominion wanted badly enough to send an inquisitor to the outer reaches. Nobody knew exactly what the man was protecting because asking direct questions was considered rude in these circles. But they knew enough. They knew that Vance had been a good man before and remained a good man now despite whatever trouble had found him. They knew that he had a niece traveling with him who was quiet and shy and always wore gloves. They knew that the Inquisitor, Morricel, had offered substantial money and received nothing in return. And they knew without being told that whatever Vance was doing was worth supporting even if they never learned the details. That was how things worked in the outer reaches. People helped each other because someday they might need help themselves. Elias noticed the changes gradually at first, and then with increasing wonder as the weeks passed. A mechanic on Taurus Station slipped him a package containing military-grade sensor jammers worth more than his ship, and refused to accept any payment for the kid. The mechanic said with a knowing look that suggested he understood more than he was admitting. Kids deserve a chance. A former naval officer who went by the name of Costa started sending encrypted messages containing Dominion patrol routes updated weekly with accuracy that suggested access to sources Elias did not want to know about. Stay safe out there was all the message ever said, and keep moving. A retired doctor who had settled on a quiet moon made house calls to check on Kira and never once mentioned that the child's heartbeat sounded wrong on her medical equipment, or that her blood pressure readings made no sense for a human. She is healthy, the doctor said each time with a smile that held secrets. Whatever she is healthy. Supplies appeared in their cargo hold without explanation. Fuel credits materialized in accounts that should have been empty. Warnings arrived before trouble, giving them time to change course and avoid patrols that would have meant disaster. Kira watched all of this with the intense curiosity that had survived everything she had endured, and one evening she asked Elias the question he had been expecting. Why do they help? She said as they watched another supply crate get delivered by a stranger who had asked for nothing in return. They do not even know me. Elias thought about that question for a long time because it deserved a real answer and not just the easy explanations that adults often gave to children. Humans remember things, he said finally. We remember our own history, even when it hurts to remember. What do you remember? Kira asked. We remember when we were small, Elias said. When we were just one species on one planet, and the galaxy was full of older civilizations who looked at us like we were nothing. He sat down next to her on a cargo crate and continued speaking in a quiet voice. We remember when we were the ones who had to hide and hope that the bigger species would not notice us or decide that we were inconvenient. Were humans hunted? Kira asked. Sometimes, Elias admitted. Not often and not by everyone, but enough times that the memory stayed with us. What happened? We survived, Elias said simply. Because some of us were stubborn and some of us were clever, and because sometimes beings from other species helped us when they did not have to. He looked at her with eyes that held both sadness and warmth. There was a time before I was born when a human colony was going to be destroyed by a corporate fleet, he said. The colony had no military and no allies and no hope of surviving on their own. What saved them? A Tyrellian merchant captain, Elias said. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose, but he used his ship to broadcast the colony's location to every news outlet in the sector. And that worked. The attention made the corporation back down because suddenly everyone was watching. And some things cannot survive being seen clearly. He put his hand on her shoulder gently. That captain died a few years later in an unrelated accident, but the colonists never forgot what he did. Elias said, they named their largest city after him. And every year they celebrate the anniversary of his choice. Do all humans remember that story? Maybe not that specific story, Elias said, but we remember the lesson. What lesson? That sometimes strangers help you for no reason except that helping is the right thing to do, he said. And when that happens, you have a responsibility. What responsibility? To be the stranger who helps someone else, Elias said. To pass it forward to the next person who needs it, even if you never find out what happens to them. Kira was quiet for a long moment, processing this in the way that children process things that are too big and too important to understand all at once. I want to be those people, she said finally. When I'm bigger, I want to help strangers who need it even when I do not know them. Elias smiled at her and felt something warm spread through his chest. Yeah, kid, he said. I think you will be. I want to remember, she said with fierce determination. Everything that people did. For me, I want to remember all of it so I can do the same for others. That is exactly the right thing to want, Elias said. Is that what being human means? She asked. Remembering and helping and passing things forward. Elias thought about that question and realized he did not have a complete answer because humanity was complicated and messy and full of contradictions, but some parts were simple. I think being human means deciding what kind of person you want to be, he said, and then trying every day to be that person even when it is hard. Can someone who is not human be human in that way? Elias looked at the small alien girl who had lost everything and found something new in the kindness of strangers. Kira, he said seriously, I think you are already more human than half the humans I have ever met. She smiled at that, and for a moment all four of her eyes sparkled with something that looked very much like hope. And outside the ship, the network of strangers who would never meet her continued to work in quiet ways to keep her safe, because that was what humans did. They remembered the ones who had helped them, and they tried to be those people for others, even when no one was watching, even when there was nothing to gain, even when the Empire itself wanted something dead and forgotten. Some things were worth protecting, and some strangers were worth helping. The humans of the outer reaches understood this in their bones and in their blood, and in the stories they told each other, in quiet moments between stars, and they would not stop. The Stand, the Inquisitor, came with 3 ships carrying enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble, and he came with a mandate signed by the Emperor. Himself, we stationed Kappa 9 was a rusted mining hub that sat at the very edge of charted space, where the stars grew thin and the void stretched endless into territories that no one had bothered to explore. It was home to roughly 4,000 souls, mostly humans who had come here because they wanted to be left alone by the powers that shaped the galaxy. They were about to learn that being left alone was no longer an option. The message arrived at dawn station time, and it was broadcast on every frequency so that no one could claim ignorance. This station is harboring a fugitive designated for Imperial termination, the Inquisitor's voice announced with cold precision. You have 72 hours to surrender the human known as Elias Vance and the asset in his possession. Failure to comply will result in orbital bombardment of this facility. There will be no further warnings. Elias heard the message in his quarters, where he had been sleeping poorly, as he had slept poorly every night since this nightmare began. Was already moving before the broadcast finished grabbing the bag he kept packed for exactly this situation and heading toward the docking bay where the errant Hope waited. He had always known this moment would come. The running would have to end eventually, and when it ended, he had always planned to run one more time to a place farther away, where maybe they would have another month or another year. He had never intended to put others at risk. These people had helped him without asking for anything in return, and now they were going to die because of his choices and his stubbornness and his refusal to do the practical thing. Kira followed behind him, silent as always, with her holographic disguise firmly in place and her small bag clutched to her chest like a shield. Where are we going? she whispered. Away. From here, Elias said, before anyone gets hurt because of us. But when they reached the docking bay, they found it blocked 300 humans stood between Elias and his ship miners with drilling equipment that could cut through starship hulls traders. With cargo loaders that could crush a man flat families with children held close and faces set with determination old. People who had lived through things that should have killed them decades ago. Young people who had never faced anything like this, but refused to look away, all of them standing in the way of his escape. What are you doing? Elias demanded, and his voice cracked with something between anger and fear. They will kill you all if you interfere with this. We know, said an old woman. At the front of the crowd, her name was Margaret Chun, and she had worked the refineries here for 40 years, until the dust got into her lungs and forced her to retire. Hands were like leather from decades of hard labor, and her eyes were like flint, hard and unyielding, and absolutely certain. You do not even know her, Elias said, gesturing at Kira. You do not know what she is or why they want her, and you are going to die for a stranger. Do not need to know her, Margaret said calmly. We know you, and that is enough. That is not enough, Elias shouted. That cannot be enough to die for. It is for us, said a man behind. Margaret, who worked the ore processors and had 3 children waiting at home. You are one of us, Vance, and that means she is one of us too, whatever she is, added another voice from the crowd. She is yours, and yours is ours. That is how it works out here, Margaret said. That is how it has always worked. Elias felt something breaking inside him because he had never asked for this, and he had never expected it, and he did not know how to carry the weight of what these people were offering. They have warships, he said desperately. They have weapons that can burn this whole station to nothing. We have ourselves, Margaret said, and we have decided that we will not hand a child to murderers, no matter what flag they fly or what authority they claim. She looked up at the viewport where the Dominion ships hung like dark omens against the stars. Humanity did not claw its way out of one gravity well and across 1,000 stars just to hand children over to tyrants, she said, and her voice carried across the silent crowd. Let them come if they want to come. Let them see what happens when they try to take one of ours. Kira stepped forward then, and Elias watched as she reached up and touched the device behind her ear that controlled her. Holographic disguise. The mask flickered and faded away. Her silver skin emerged shimmering in the harsh station. Lighting, her 4 eyes opened, all of them, and they were filled with tears that looked like liquid starlight. Crowd saw what she really was, and not one of them stepped back. Not one of them looked away. Not one of them wavered in their stance between her and the ships that wanted her dead. I am sorry, Kira said, and her true voice emerged layered and musical and utterly alien. I am sorry for bringing this to you, child, Margaret said gently. You did not bring this to us. She walked forward and knelt down so she could look Kira in her strange, beautiful eyes. Evil men brought this, Margaret said, and we choose how we answer evil. I promised I would be quiet, Kira whispered. I promised I would not cause trouble. Elias moved to her side and knelt down beside Margaret, putting himself at Kira's level, the way he had done that first day in the wreckage. No, he said softly. Not anymore. He took her hands in his own and squeezed them gently. You never have to be quiet again, he said. You never have to hide again, but they will hurt people because of me. They might try, Elias said, but look around you. She looked, and she saw 300 humans standing firm in the face of impossible odds. She saw faces that held fear, yes, but also determination. She saw strangers who had chosen to be family. She saw the thing that Elias had tried to explain about humanity, finally made real and visible and undeniable. This is what we do, Elias said. When we decide someone belongs to us, we do not let them go. Not for money, Margaret added. Not for threats. Not for anything. The crowd echoed. The standoff lasted 9 days, 9 days of tension and negotiation and careful maneuvering while the Dominion ships held position, and the humans refused to break 9 days of Varacel, calculating losses against gains and realizing slowly that the mathematics did not favor him. A massacre of a human settlement would create political complications that outweighed the value of one deviant, no matter how satisfying the completion of his mission would be. The Inquisitor withdrew on the 10th day. His ships turned and burned toward Dominion space, leaving behind a station full of humans who had won a battle they should have lost. Simply by refusing to surrender, Kira stood at the viewport and watched them go with all 4 eyes open and no disguise hiding what she was. "They will come back," she said quietly. "Someday they will try again." "Probably," Elias agreed. "What will we do then?" Elias looked at the crowd that had become something more than strangers and something deeper than friends. "Same thing we did this time," he said. "We will stand together, and we will not give up what matters most." Kira nodded slowly and reached out to take his hand. "I want to be human," she said, "the way you explained it." "I know, kid. I want to remember everything that happened here, and I want to pass it forward." "You will," Elias said with certainty. "I know you will," and she did decades later, when she returned to Valkyrie space and began the work that would eventually change an empire. She carried with her the lesson she had learned in a rusted mining station at the edge of known space. Some things matter more than survival. Some strangers are worth dying for, and humanity at its best is not a species at all, but a choice that anyone can make to stand with the hunted against the hunters, to remember the ones who helped and become the one who helps, to never be quiet when silence means letting evil win the galaxy. Remembered the species that conquered, but had loved the species that sheltered. And Kira Vance, first ambassador of the Valkyrie reform, never forgot where she had learned what that really meant.